good time zone. And a happy birthday to all of those around the world. We're back with our, hopefully, like a weekly reading Terra a Journey. Might have to step out for a moment at some point, but until then, we left off on a what was it? Chapter 5.3. A sub chapter of the Ursus Empire chapter. Started reading all about the history of Ursus. And now it looks like we're getting maybe a slightly more detailed version of the history of Ursus. Not sure what this is, but let's find out. Hold on, forgot to do the audio. There we go. Yeah, so we finished off the main Ursus chapter. Kautze had a lot to say about the true nature of the Yorotzvo. And now we're at founding of the Ursus Empire, which they've already covered a little bit, so we'll see what this actually adds. More detail, I assume. By Terran calendar 16, the formidable army of the Knights Morakagan had since departed from deity Grifferberg, but the echoes of suffering still lingered in this war-torn city. The defeated nobles of the Hippogriff Kingdom, crushed by war, imposed even harsher rule over Ursus, forcibly conscripting more peasants and workers to aid in the city's reconstruction. Rudimentary tents sprang up outside of the damaged city walls, housing stonemasons, carpenters, builders, and laborers who had no means of escape. Around 200,000 peasants and soldiers were compelled to partake in this extravagant rebuilding effort, transporting timber from Lytania's forests to craft luxurious furniture and hauling fine stone from Victoria to serve as construction material. The nobles aimed to make the newly resurrected deity Grifferberg a symbol of the Hippogriff Kingdom's rebirth and recover from their past wounds, no matter the price, even if it meant countless Ursus lives. As the laborers' lives slipped away in agony, the flames of resentment and fury in Ursus grew even stronger. The simmering tension finally erupted in TC-18. Oh, TC is Terran calendar. I think they mentioned TC one other time in the Ursus chapter, and I wasn't sure what that meant. Terran calendar, that makes sense. A group of Ursus laborers pushed to the brink, killed their hippogriff overseers, and seized a half-constructed tower in deity Grifferberg's central square. Working on this tower had forced them to miss the harvest, leaving their families facing a dire winter with little hope of survival. 30 soldiers were immediately dispatched to retake the tower, but they defected on the spot, forming a small rebel force of 60 to 70 fighters within mere hours. At the same time, a palace construction unit was reassigned to quell the uprising under the leadership of Igor, the war hero who had earned the title the First Champion for his stellar performance in the fight against the Knights Mora. It took several hours for Igor and his hastily assembled troops to gather their equipment and march to the square. When they arrived, they found that the rebels had already fortified themselves in the tower and were locked in a standoff with the soldiers outside. Meanwhile, more laborers abandoned their work to join the crowd, and the streets surrounding the square were soon packed with onlookers. The rebel leader stood atop the tower, shouting to the crowd below about the years of enslavement and suffering he and his people had endured, further inciting unrest among the masses. Sensing the situation was spiraling out of control, Igor removed his armor and instructed his men to clear the square and ensure no one got near the tower. Then he approached the tower alone. The soldiers inside recognized the legendary Ursus hero. They opened the door and let him in, promptly shutting the heavy gates behind him. Once Igor entered, the half-finished tower fell into an eerie silence. No sounds of an argument or struggle could be heard from within. As time passed, the crowds began to grow restless again, pushing against the line of soldiers. They were eager to witness how the Ursus hero would deal with his fellow countrymen. Just as the soldiers were losing control of the surging crowd, the tower's heavy doors cracked open and a tall figure emerged. Igor stepped out, walking slowly into the square without saying a word. Behind him, the ground was littered with bodies. The crowd fell silent. The hero and the soldiers remained silent as well. The hushed crowd gradually dispersed, returning to their lives of painful servitude. Igor, his face calm and composed, left the square. Yet according to those who would later fight by his side in the rebellion, he cried for hours that night. The official records of the Hippogriff Kingdom claim that the loyal Ursus officer Igor swiftly executed over 60 treacherous rebels. However, a more credible account suggests that Igor persuaded his countrymen to take their own lives. To this day, we cannot say for certain what Igor told his unfortunate compatriots. Perhaps he convinced them that the Ursus were not yet strong enough to challenge the Hippogriffs. Perhaps he reassured them that he would one day end their endless suffering. Or maybe he promised them a brighter future. What we do know is that Igor's resolve becomes clearer as his story unfolds. Very interesting. The Hippogriff rulers, having witnessed how Igor dealt with his own people, became even more convinced of his loyalty to the kingdom and increasingly relied on him to maintain control. As a result, Igor's military rank quickly rose. By TC 25, he had attained the rank of colonel. Though he was not the army's highest ranking officer, everyone knew that it was Igor who truly commanded the troops. In the winter of TC 27, Igor, having fully secured the trust of the Hippogriff nobility, led the Ursus in a sweeping uprising that engulfed the entire kingdom. For years, he had been secretly coordinating with military and civilian groups across the kingdom, preparing for this monumental war. Finally, the moment for revenge had arrived. Over the next 3 years, Igor's rebel forces engaged the Hippogriffs in a grueling and protracted conflict. As the war raged on, more and more Ursus joined the struggle to overthrow their Hippogriff rulers. Eventually, even some Hippogriff nobles aligned themselves with the rebels. War and the famine that followed claimed countless lives, but in TC 31, the rebels triumphed. As a symbol of political reconciliation, the capital of the kingdom, deity Grifferberg, was preserved by the combined Ursus and Hippogriff forces. That same year, Igor was crowned Tsar in the city, and the Ursus Empire was born, replacing the Hippogriff Kingdom as a new and formidable power. So the TC 18 was when tower incident happened. And 10 years later, pretty much, in TC-27, Igor led the rebellion. So I think that shows a lot of what level of pragmatism he has, right? I think it's probably fair to say as they're like discussing, you know, what actually happened in there, it's probably fair to say that he knew he had to still get the Hippogriff's trust, that this little uprising at the tower wouldn't amount to anything, and he had to play the long con a little bit more. Very interesting. And now we have Chernobog. A whole section on Chernobog. The time zone everyone who's coming in. So, nearly 3 years have passed since the infamous Chernobog-Lungmen incident, and the feared full-scale war never came to be. Despite the devastation, the former industrial stronghold has stubbornly survived. Chernobog, along with its people, perhaps reflects a certain truth about Terra. This land may suffer again and again, but life will always go on. The prosperity of the old days. I once visited Chernobog in its prime. At the time, the city consisted of more than 30 plates, making it one of the few colossal nomadic cities on the vast plains of Ursus. Towering buildings and sprawling industrial complexes could be seen everywhere. 30 plates is a lot. On the streets, vehicles powered by Orangenium roared by, most of them loaded with industrial materials and products. As they sped past, you could feel the deafening roar of the machines as the smell of industrial fumes assaulted your nostrils. The streets were lined with piles of Orangenium slag, likely kicked up by the constant winds and movement. However, the pervasive grayness of the Orangenium industry had not yet swallowed Chernobog whole. I still remember that fleeting summer of Ursus, right before dinner time, when girls had just finished their school day, would flock to the nearby record shops and bookstores, wearing short skirts and chattering excitedly about the latest rock music and novels. They were the most vibrant scene on the streets. In a restaurant that prided itself on being the most scene, I saw a drunken Litanian merchant brawling with a Colombian businessman. All because the latter had the audacity to speak ill of the Witch King. After they were pulled apart, an Iberian musician resumed playing a cheerful tune from his homeland. Back then, Chernobog was bustling and cosmopolitan. Of course, the infected did not share in the prosperity. Outside the city, checkpoints maintained by Ursus military police rigorously inspected every person's identity and health status before allowing entry. If any infected were found, they were immediately sent to a local noble's estate and assigned various forms of labor until their final days. Yesterday's squabbles. Looking back on the history of Chernobog, we see that the city emerged as a result of two factors: the rise of Orangenium industry and the Ursine industrial nobility's ongoing defiance against the Empire's long-standing militarism. Around 1070, a new noble, Boris, discovered the sarcophagus near the mining town of Chernobog. At that time, Boris's estate relied heavily on the mines, and refineries controlled by the Ursus military. Naturally, the capabilities of the newly discovered device sparked Boris's ideas of freeing himself from their control. After some research and experiments, people found that the sarcophagus could consistently output significant amounts of energy without the need for orangenium. And side note here, I once helped the Ursus study the sarcophagus. However, rather than assisting their research, my efforts were actually cemented more on controlling the pace of progress to prevent them from being killed by their own curiosity. I do wonder why there is only one sarcophagus and not a whole chamber of them. And was there someone inside of it? Guess we'll never know. Meanwhile, Ursus' established pattern of war for profit was disrupted when the armies were utterly defeated during the Blood Peak campaign in 1072. The old cycle, by which Ursus distributed the spoils of each successive war amongst its nobility, was broken. The subsequent Great Rebellion also demonstrated that the Ursian military factions were tightening their grip on internal resources. By this time, they even attempted to oust the sitting Tsar Fyodor from deity Grifferberg and replace him with a new sovereign who would support their expansionist agenda. Amidst this turmoil, Chernobog, with its miraculous sarcophagus, became a prized target. The Fourth Army activated first, forcibly entering Chernobog in an attempt to seize the sarcophagus and exploit its energy potential. However, their efforts ended in failure. Chernobog continued to thrive, powered by the sarcophagus's low-cost energy, once again drawing the attention of the military factions. Boris, who had clashed with the Third Army controlling the Far-Scope refinery over raw material pricing, refused to allow any military presence within the city. In an effort to protect Chernobog from external forces, from external interference, Boris appointed himself mayor. The city council, formed at the behest of the state council, was entirely created by Boris and served only as a nominal institution, essentially a tool for him to share power and secure alliances with his collaborators. However, Boris failed to realize that he was challenging forces so powerful that even Tsar Fyodor approached them with caution. The sarcophagus brought Chernobog economic growth and energy, and the council provided some order, but none of this would arm Boris against the armies. Looks like the next part is post-crisis. Was the purge of the sarcophagus research team, was that when the Fourth Army tried to take it? Is that what happened? I'm not sure. Let me see. Yes, that's what happened, yeah. So yeah, when the Fourth Army entered Chernobog and tried to seize the sarcophagus, they killed all the researchers. Which would have included Calcit, I believe, was the only survivor. Unless... I can't remember if Felinik's mom made it out. We did see her at one point. I can't remember if she made it out and died later or if she died there. No, Felinik's mom did escape. But yeah, we don't. And then she died later on. So there you go. So today's end game. We promise all citizens of Ursus that there is no risk of the infected spreading beyond the federal territory of Chernobog. His action reflects His Majesty the Tsar's mercy toward those suffering in this situation. Ursine Central Army spokesperson Captain Makarov. Six months after the conclusion of the Chernobog-Lungmen incident, Ursus and Yen reached a final agreement. Ursus agreed to compensate Yen for their part of economic damages caused by the incident, and in return, Yen forgave a portion of that amount, returning it to Ursus to aid in Chernobog's reconstruction. It is said that Tsar Fyodor was crucial in pushing this agreement through the State Council. As part of the agreement, Ursus rebuilt a smaller nomadic city in the Chernobog region to house the survivors of the incident. Chernobog was reclassified as a federal territory, with its federal council serving as the highest administrative authority under direct oversight of the Tsar. The Tsar appointed a commissioner as an observer, ensuring that, at least in theory, no local nobles could exert influence over Chernobog. Given the catastrophe, the vast majority of Chernobog's residents were destined to become infected. Therefore, the reclassification of Chernobog actually deviated from Ursus's traditionally harsh policies toward the infected. In fact, there were indeed a few voices against the plan, and the Tsar had to dispatch the armies to surround Chernobog and prevent any mass escape of infected. That's that's a bit strange. I once asked a friend in Ursus to pass through the army's stringent checkpoints and enter this rebuilt city to document its current state. Today, only about a dozen city plates remain in Chernobog. Traditional Ursine architecture is now caked with industrial dust. Guard posts, barbed wires, and orangenium-powered searchlights are spread across the city's outskirts. The checkpoints, once used to manage outside threats, are now used in reverse to ensure no infected can leave the city. I don't know why, I thought for a second Chernobog was like, oh yeah, infected can live here. It's like, yeah, infected can live there, but apparently they can only live there. They're trapped inside of it by a military blockade. Alright. So, I don't know why I was trying to give Ursus benefit of the doubt a little bit, I guess. But that was a mistake. Today, only about a dozen city plates remain. The traditionally Ursine architecture is now caked with industrial dust. Guard posts, barbed wire, and orangenium-powered searchlights are spread across the city outskirts. The checkpoints, once used to manage outside threats, are now used in reverse to ensure no infected can leave the city. For easier management, Chernobog's gates are only open during the day. At night, they're sealed shut. Most of the shops still primarily sell goods related to the orangenium industry, but the once relaxed atmosphere has vanished. Now the streets are mostly filled with infected hurrying about or business clients passing through. The busiest spots are the infected clinics and the supply depots, the former providing rare solace to the infected, the latter distributing desperately needed food in the name of the Tsar, specifically for the infected within the city. As a result, many infected have fled from other parts of Ursus to Chernobog, reasoning that living under these privileges is far better than toiling away in dangerous mines outside. Even some ordinary people have run out of options, choose to live in the city. Since the Ursus military station outside the city is reluctant to get involved in the area teeming with infected, and no figure from the imperial government is willing to assume leadership, many members of the district council are local infected. As for the nominal council secretary, that position is simply a formality filled by a member of the state council. Yeah, it's interesting. Tsar Fyodor, they keep, like, people say that he's trying to be more lenient, I guess, on the infected issue. And maybe this is him trying. It's an interesting way to try it. Not a great way. They are managing themselves. The military doesn't technically get involved, but they are actually still trapped inside what is effectively a giant ghetto. So, not the best. Is it better than working as to your death in the mines? Sure, I guess. The city, or the future's uncertainty. The Chernobog Lungmen incident was merely a small crack which released a tiny bit of mounting pressure within the Ursus Empire. This city, which grew through its struggle against the military, was Ursus's price to pay. The shining of the agreement between Yin and Ursus was also the first step towards softening Ursus's treatment of the infected. It is hard to say what future lies for Chernobog. After the sarcophagus was retrieved, Chernobog lost the element that once made it extraordinary. It became once again just another cold, oppressive town like most others in Ursus. Yet Chernobog remains unique. It is under the protection of the reigning Tsar, and the vast majority of its population are infected. As for whether the military forces are there to defend the city or encircle it, that remains an open question. Well, it's definitely to encircle it, but I suppose it can also be to defend it from the militaries that, like the Fourth Army. But if you don't let anyone out, it's still a prison. I wonder what people think about or know about the Lungmen incident in the first place. They don't talk about it here, obviously, because it's what happens in the game, but I wonder what the wider public know about that. I assume they're just like, Reunion took over the city and then tried to cause a war with Lungmen. I assume it's probably all they know. which I guess isn't technically untrue. There's just a little tiny detail there with a certain man named Cache. Or Koche. Is it Koche or Cache? I think it's Koche. Chapter 5.4, Gaul. We got a whole chapter on Gaul. This is nice. It's a big chapter too. A nice big chapter on Gaul. We get a lot. We get bits and pieces here and there, especially around the War of the Four Emperors. But a lot of its early history and everything, and its society, not so much. Epitaph. Or epigraph. The Emperor is dead. There were no legal proceedings, no trial, and no plans for the future. The Londiniers have fallen into a state of blind confusion and fervor. Crowds run wild in the streets, surrendering to their most primal urges, severing all ties with the past. The revelers drinking through the night sweep through every corner of the city like a gust of wind. Many shops are looted, and the streets are littered with broken glass and beer bottles. A Gaulish student remarks that even Lingonay has never been this chaotic, not even in 1031. Nobles who support the Austrian royal family privately compare Victoria to Gaul, saying the country now looks doomed to fall. I've been staying at the school for the past few days, using the time to clean out years of accumulated clutter for my office. I even found several things I brought back from Gaul in my youth. When I was just a regular lecturer, I would often show these items to my students during lectures on social change to showcase Gaul's accomplishments. But now, as I look at these yellowed newspapers, photos, and flyers, I can't help but think about myself. If my life were to end tomorrow, would I leave anything worthy of praise? Outside, the crowds continued their celebrations. I too remained sleepless, though not from joy, but from worry. Written in the turbulent year of 1072. That's already a great look. For a Gaulish person who first had their own country destroyed and then taken over, and then the new country, the emperor is killed, and they're like, well, we've seen this before. There is no need to elaborate on Gaul's history. Like most ancient nations of the core, Gaul suffered a devastating blow from the Knights Morakagan at the beginning of the last millennium. Thereafter, she slowly rebuilt and gradually annexed surrounding city-states, eventually growing into a powerful empire. At one time, Gaul was the most powerful and influential country on Terra. Gaulish once served as the diplomatic lingua franca, or should it be lingua Gaulish? And her currency, the livre, was the most prized trade. Yet all these once great achievements vanished with the fall of the Gaul in 1031. Her mighty empire crumbled, and her neighbors swiftly carved up its remains. More than half a century has passed, and it feels as though Gaul is far behind us, but things are not so simple. I have no intention on analyzing the reasons for Gaul's downfall or recounting the Battle of the Four Emperors here. I will cover both of these subjects later on. Instead, this chapter focuses on the subtle yet lasting effects Gaul continues to have on our daily lives. Okay. Lingone Reborn. The first time in my life that I felt profound humiliation was in Lingone. At the age of 16, I was visiting family in the grand capital of Gaul. At a party hosted by my uncle, I attempted to mingle with the local socialites, but they dismissed me outright, simply because I wasn't from Lingone. I may have not inherited a title, but I am still noble, no? How could they treat me like that? That's when I realized what makes this city unique. There are only two types of people here, Lingonians and everyone else. Later, as I encountered one obstacle after another during the city's reconstruction, the memory from my youth resurfaced again and again. Each time I felt like giving up, it reminded me that I couldn't abandon this chance to take charge of Lingone. Memoirs of du Comte Osman. In 833, Comte Osman, or Count Osman, received a daunting mission from Emperor Francois of Gaul. The ambitious young soldier, one of the Les Esperes, I'm not sure. Let's see. That one's throwing me off a bit.
Une espèce.
Also doesn't come up as actual French question mark. There's espèce without a T. Or an extra. It's pretty much spelled entirely differently. Might not be real French. I'll say that's why I couldn't figure it out. Not a me problem. Espace Day, I guess. Espace Day. I don't know. Was appointed overseer to oversee the conversion of the capital, Lingone, into a nomadic city over a period of 20 years. This was an immensely important assignment. The project would take Gaul, the first nation of Terra, to turn an ancient city into a nomadic one. Really, the first nation on Terra to turn an ancient city into a nomadic one. The Emperor had full confidence that Gaul, with her advanced technology, vast wealth, and ample resources, could see through such an ambitious project. However, the plan was far more complicated than the Emperor envisioned. Go figure. Osman's first challenge was navigating his fraught relationship with the Lingonian nobility. According to Gaulish tradition, a project of such magnitude would have been managed by les enrobes, government officials in charge of the tax administration and other domestic affairs. However, the emperor had grown frustrated with bureaucratic delays. A military man, he believed, would get things done quicker. According to Osman's recounts on his early struggles in his memoirs, the mayor of Lingonay repeatedly declined his request for a private meeting. Instead, he aligned himself with the conservative nobles at court, refusing to provide any assistance. The city planning proposals, submitted by the Comte's office, faced countless delays, and all paperwork requiring the mayor's approval or city funding was returned on the last possible day. Osman had to hold meeting after meeting with his team discussing potential roadblocks and planning the next stages of construction. When he complained about City Hall's obstructionism, the Emperor was dismissive. They're responding to all your submissions by the deadline, aren't they? The mayor has a busy schedule, you know. Seeing that the Emperor was unwilling to intervene in noble squabbles, Osman took matters into his own hands. He began stamping all documents with the army's official seal and delivering them through military channels, avoiding municipal red tape. As Osman later remarked, desperate times call for desperate measures. It wasn't just the nobility who had issues with the project. Many commoners were also vocal in their opposition. During construction, Lingonay was transformed rather. Into a giant open-air work site. Large work crews moved through the city. The cacophony of drills and jackhammers combined with swirling dust, disrupted life for everyone in Lingonay. To mitigate the issue, Osman had no choice but to extend the project's timeline and divide the city into zones for phased construction. Transport between the old city and the newly constructed mobile sections became one of the most profitable businesses during this period. The vehicles shuttling between the two areas nearly formed two uninterrupted straight lines. Additionally, many older Lingonay complained that Osman had completely changed the city's traditional friendly character. The old Lingonay was filled with narrow alleys and lovely little houses where neighbors on the second floor could greet each other through the windows. Vehicles only traveled on the city's main thoroughfares, and the spaces between buildings were largely enclosed areas. In the new city, however, tall buildings and tree-lined boulevards replaced the cramped old city streets. Some of the roads in the city center were now more than 100 meters wide. The ground floors of the new buildings featured large glass display windows showcasing expensive clothing and crafts that symbolized the arrival of a new era. Basically, Lingonay had transformed into a giant shopping and amusement park. However, after the nomadic city was completed, the influx of new residents quickly diluted the resentment that had built up among the locals, and people began to enjoy life in the vast new city. Lingonay has since become a model for all new nomadic cities. Sounds like he made it car dependent, which is disgusting. In the end, what the Emperor initially envisioned as a simple relocation turned into a grand-scale reconstruction project. More than 40,000 buildings were demolished and over 90,000 structures were built or reconstructed. The construction took 25 years, 5 years longer than planned. Comte Osman was blamed for the delay and demoted for a lesser position in Lingonay. However, Osman was more than happy to accept this new role, as it gave him plenty of time and energy to travel at this great land and write his memoirs. Following the reconstruction of Lingonay, other nations also began relocating their old cities onto nomadic plates. The grandiose floor-to-ceiling windows, extravagant bronze decorations, and magnificent marble buildings of Lingonay came to be known as style empire in architecture. Even after the fall of the empire, this style, and the Gaulish culture in general, continued to influence neighboring countries. Emperor Francois kind of sucked. Emperor Francois hated the bureaucracy, so he put Osman in charge. And then when Osman came to him and was like, yeah, these bureaucracy guys are trying to obstruct me, he's like, it's your fault. And then when it was all said and done, he was blamed and demoted. And not all the bureaucracy guys. Strange, Emperor Francois. I'm not sure what you were thinking. Oh, sweet life. Imagine a city without running water, sewage systems, or electricity. The streets are crowded with workers hauling water, night watchmen manually lighting street lamps one by one before sunset, and every household must leave its chamber pot at the door for a special crew to pick up. I don't think I need to go into any more detail here. My point is, the conveniences we enjoy today didn't appear overnight. Gaul wasn't the first place to introduce running water to homes, nor was she the first country to provide heating. However, Gaul was the first to bundle these new inventions together and make them widely available. With a robust economy, Gaul could afford the cost of large-scale urban renovations and pipeline installations. While an ordinary Gaulish citizen would sit comfortably in a heated room, boiling tap water and sipping coffee on a cold winter's day, a less Ursine noble would still be preoccupied with watching their fireplace to ensure it didn't set their home ablaze. These improved living conditions nurtured a rich cultural life. Without the burden of daily chores or worrying about missing the daily water delivery, Gaulish citizens could participate in a variety of different activities. What was once a privilege enjoyed only by a few nobles can now become available to the masses. People could go shopping, visit art galleries, or attend the ever-growing number of social salons. A wave of novels, paintings, and plays celebrating modern life emerged in Gaul. People at the time period dubbed this era the Belle Époque. However, this was still a tale of two cities. A separate group of playwrights and artists focused their works on the lives of the poor. They argued that the well-to-do should not ignore the suffering of those unable to enjoy the beauty of modern Gaul. These artists became known as the Gaulish realists or Gaulish critics, and their work deeply influenced future artists across the land. Fever pitch. After the fall of Gaul, nearly 30 million Gaulish speakers found themselves without a country. Most stayed in their homeland, becoming citizens of Victoria or Litania, but many chose to seek new home abroad. Gaulish neighborhoods formed in numerous nomadic cities as exiles settled there. Some Gaulishmen harbored deep resentment and bitterness for their homeland's collapse and longed for its revival. These individuals, who called themselves restorationists, often traveled between countries in search of support for their cause. The restorationists were racially diverse and hailed from all different social classes, united by their shared identity as Gaulishmen. They frequently spoke in public about what it means to be Gaulish. They viewed their Gaulish identity as transcending region, time, race, and bloodlines. Rooted purely in cultural thought, to them, identity as Gaulish meant embracing Gaul's past culture and recognizing its sophisticated way of life and former dominance. When Victoria implemented a policy of cultural cleansing in the occupied region of Lower Gaul, the restorationist movement within Victoria was temporarily suppressed. However, this act enraged Gaulish exiles in other regions who became even more active in spreading their message. Yeah, that's gross. Gaulish restorationists operating across Terra deeply influenced how people in many areas understood their own identities. Previously, most people considered themselves as part of a nation simply because their ancestors had lived there. The idea that people could discover or even choose their own identities had never occurred to them. Some people whose families had lived abroad for generations also joined the Gaulish Restoration movement, even if they barely spoke the language and or couldn't distinguish between Gaul and her former vassals. Restorationists often left a strong impression, brimming with passion and energy. Losing their homeland reignited their patriotism. I say this because I feel the same way, a Gaulish student told me during a Restorationist speech at school. Oh, that's it. War of the Four Nations. First, a water break. I would like to see a little Gaul in somewhere. That'd be interesting to see, I think. We've only seen like 2 Gaulish characters, maybe. Maybe the troop. Was the troop Gaulish? That troop might have been Gaulish. Yeah, they were. So Lucian was born in Victoria, but former Gaulish territory. Don't know if that makes him actually Gaulish or not. Don't know what his ancestry is, but I guess he counts. Clement Dubois was born to a Gaulish family. Oh, this guy. Yeah, okay. So, a little more. A handful of Gaulish characters. All right. War of the Four Nations. AKA or emperors, right? Unless this is a different one. Epigraph. Soldiers, as you sharpen your blades and polish your cannons and prepare to give your lives for the glory of the Empire, I, son of Gaul, your emperor, bring you news that fills me with profound sorrow and rage. Not long ago, the Witch King of Vitania finally tore off his false mask of wisdom, revealing his true face of barbarity and cruelty. He has murdered Gaul's righteous sons and daughters, desecrating their noble souls with vile sorcery. He believed his brutality would intimidate your emperor and shake our empire. The Witch King does not realize that his once grand spire now casts only the shadow of a foolish clown. This clown mocks Gaul's vigilant warriors. He sees us as cowards, and he thinks that decades of prosperity have made us soft, or perhaps that Victoria and Ursus have bound our hands, leaving us unable to strike back. Yesterday evening, as I passed through the camp, some of you asked me, "Is it true, your majesty? Will the great Gaul submit in silence? Will her warriors wait to see what others do before deciding whether to bow to a clown?" I say to you, never. Son and daughters of Gaul, I command you to march at once. We will not wait for a better moment. We need nothing more than the fire of vengeance in our hearts. La Grande Armée will march on Litania now and crush these arrogant fools. When the merciless imperial army encircles his spire, the clown will realize he is standing on his gallows. Nothing will save him from the Empire's wrath. Our enemies have trampled not only Gaul's dignity, but also the best chance for two great nations to forge a lasting friendship and stride together into a new era of prosperity. Soldiers, Gaul has long extended the olive branch, but the vile sorcerer has swatted it away. That clown calling himself the Witch King has dragged his people into an unnecessary war, and every drop of blood spilled on Litania's soil will rest on his hands. Corsica's the first speech before battle, August 1029. Love a good speech. History. According to the widely accepted Terran city calendar, this century began in the year 1001 and will conclude in 1100. However, the Salons of Londinium argue that the true start of the 11th century occurred between 1029 and 1031 during the Gaulish-Litanian Victorian Ursine conflict known as the War of the Four Nations. This war drastically reshaped the geopolitical landscape of the core, erasing one empire from the political map and elevating another to a new level of dominance. Oh, you know what I'm thinking of? The War of the Four Nations had the Battle of the Four Emperors. I'm like, isn't it War Four Emperors? I mean, same difference, but it was the Battle of the Four Emperors in the War of the Four Nations. For nearly 70 years following most social and political issues could be traced back to this great conflict, and post-war Victoria, this new Victorian century view became very popular. fueling a sense of national pride until 1072 when Parliament hanged the Lion King. In any case, when we look back at 1029, we see that dark clouds loomed overhead. Even those who paid little attention to such matters could sense that a great and brutal war was rapidly approaching. I still have a letter sent by my family in the year the war broke out, urging me to pause my studies and leave Litania to seek refuge in Iberia. Relations between Victoria and Gaul had rapidly deteriorated ever since Columbia's independence. Clashes had become frequent, with high-speed battleships ramming each other out on the barrens and artillery fire exchanges near nomadic cities. Corsica I and Tsar Ivan Evgenovich of Ursus maintained a facade of cordial friendship, but Gaul's blockade of Ursus, which cut her off from the core, deepened tensions between the two nations. So Gaul was destroyed after Colombia got independence, actually. So that's gives us a bit of a time frame for all of that. What's more, the political situation in Litania, the empire east of Gaul, had already begun to worsen. The Witch King had consolidated his power base, but Litanians no longer spoke of him as a wise and decisive ruler. He had in fact become a madman who's said to be capable of summoning catastrophes at will. Once he sent a messenger to other nations demanding they surrender their crowns, and then sent an assassin to slit the messenger's throat before he even left Litania just because he changed his mind. Wow, incredible. The Witch King's unusually long reign and the reforms he imposed on Litania had already enraged the Kurfürsten. His brutal rule terrified the populace. Many eyes were fixed on top of this spire, waiting for Litania to stray off course and to be the first to plunge into the abyss of war. Amid these ominous signs, we entered the summer of 1029. Yep. Hold on a second. Yeah, I'll be right back. Is this my BRB? It is. Be right back. Alrighty. We're back. Thumbs up. Where were we? Amidst these ominous signs, we entered the summer of 1029. Gaul had repeatedly sent imperial messengers to Litania, hoping to bring her into their sphere of influence. This time, however, the imperial messenger carried a personal letter to Litania, which was already showing signs of internal strife. Corsica I invited the Witch King to become his brother-in-law. He officially proposed that Litania become an allied state of the empire, promising at least 100 years of stability and prosperity under the protection of a Gaulish Gurinator, i.e., the emperor himself. Such an audacious demand. I was about to say that's an audacious demand. Such an audacious demand would have angered even the most mild-mannered ruler, let alone the crazed Witch King. Furious, the king and the spire executed every Gaulish messenger in Litania, whether or not they had anything to do with the Gaulish imperial household, and molded them into a 20-meter tall statue presenting this thank you gift to the Gaulish emperor. Oh my goodness. The Witch King's retaliation shook the entire core and sparked intense calls for war within Gaul. Exactly as Emperor Corsica had hoped. Oh snap. The emperor's grand armée quickly mobilized along the Litania border, and the emperor himself, taking command of the front. Before setting out, Corsica I, hailed as the youngest military genius in imperial history, promised the soldiers that justice would be served, that the Witch King and his spire would burn in the fierce flames of the Gaulish Empire. In August 1029, Gaul completed her military preparations and officially declared war on Litania. Strategizing. Gaulish military leaders, particularly the marshals closest to Corsica, were well aware that the empire had geopolitical rivals spanning the entire core, and Litania was not the most immediate threat. Despite the lack of friendly history between the two nations, forging an alliance with Litania was critical to Corsica's strategy at the time. In doing so, the two powers could join forces to prevent Ursus from advancing further south into the core and compel Victoria to shift its own focus southward, where it would inevitably clash with the Iberian forces who were determined to expand their power onto the land. The prevailing view holds that Corsica I's strategy in 1029 was based on three key assumptions. First, the mistrust and long-standing enmity between the Kurfürsten and the Witch King had reached a boiling point. Even if the Witch King had not gone mad, his drastic measures, severely weakening the power of the Kurfürsten and allowing Syracuse to become fully independent actually, had already sown lasting discontent within the court. While the Litanian nobility would not hesitate to fight for their spires, they were not as eager to defend the spire. The emperor believed, rightly or wrongly, that a significant number of Litanian nobles had already negotiated with messengers. The price for betraying their mad king was just as Litania had done in Bolivar. Second, Gaul's other rivals, particularly those still engaged in military skirmishes with the empire, were dealing with their own problem. Though the frontier's independence had been secured for a decade, okay, so 1019-ish, its aftershocks still reverberated through Victoria. The king and parliament were both hesitant to launch yet another military intervention without sufficient preparation. In the north, Ursus's armies were assembling for a new offensive against Kazimierz, where the campaign knights were fully prepared to pin down the Ursus forces on the battlefield. As a result, the Emperor and his marshals believed that neither Victoria nor Ursus could effectively intervene in Gaul's campaign. Third, the balance of power in the core had already shifted before the war began. Gaul's pride would never allow Corsica to admit this publicly, but the young emperor expressed his concerns to his closest advisors. In private letters, he acknowledged that Gaul's golden age was over. The vassal and city-state system centered around Lingonet was turning into a painful trap, and a bloated, corrupt bureaucracy was eating away at the empire's lifeblood. Gaul was losing her dominance in the core region, and more than ever, she needed an ally. However, the emperor could never show weakness. That only would invite exploitation. The emperor chose Litania, but his plan hinged on one crucial condition. Litania could no longer be ruled by a powerful monarch like the Witch King. The reins of the alliance had to be firmly in Gaul's hands. Therefore, Corsica planned to end the Witch King's reign through war, using military force to shape Litania into a suitable ally. There is some, like, Napoleonic War era politics going on here. Which, fitting that the emperor is also named Corsica, then. As that is where Napoleon is from. It is clear that Gaul's last emperor and his marshals made a grave miscalculation regarding the war. However, this misjudgment should not be attributed solely to arrogance. The eventual intervention of Victoria and Ursus indicates that Corsica I's strategic vision was not entirely far-fetched. Gaul had genuine chance to reclaim her dominance through the war, and Corsica, it can be assumed, harbored even greater ambitions beyond that. Of course, history has given us a final answer. War is not a docile beast that can be easily controlled. Even a military genius like Corsica I could not steer its course alone. War. The war. At the outset of the war, the Grande Armée advanced eastward under Corsica's command, quickly breaking through what the nobles of the Spires had boasted as an impenetrable western defensive line. Corsica I's military brilliance was on full display. Instead of dividing his force across multiple fronts, he consolidated the bulk of his army into a single advance, appointing his most trusted marshals to command the flanks. While Litania's scouts were still attempting to pinpoint Gaul's primary line of attack, the Grande Armée had already pierced deep into Litanian territory like a pile driver's spear, opening a gateway for further incursions. Foreseeing the Witch King's counterattack, Corsica deployed Gaul's finest casters to the front lines, including even a few from Casdal's royal court, to counter Litania's lethal Oranginium arts. How do you get those guys? By December 1029, just 4 months, Litania had lost several important nomadic cities and 4 Kurfürstenkreise, or Kreise. Gaul even captured several Litania's finest arts spires. It was at this point, after 4 months of self-imposed isolation, that the Witch King finally cast the shadow of his twisted horns over the Gaulish army. Though he did not personally appear on the front lines, the Witch King resonated with several nearby spires, unleashing devastating Oranginium arts that tore apart the advancing vanguard like a catastrophe. At the same time, Großherzog Leopold and other Kurfürsten loyal to Litania launched a counterattack, forcing the Gaulish legion to halt its advance. While Gaulish and Sarkaz casters mitigated some of the damage, they were helpless against the Witch King's overwhelming power. Corsica was forced to reassess his strategy, admitting in his correspondence that he had underestimated the most formidable caster on this great land. By 1030, the war had reached a stalemate. When the tide began to turn against Gaul, the reason was simple. Gaul's rivals had stopped on looking. Frederick III of Victoria and Tsar Ivan of Ursus moved their armies at almost the same time, recognizing that this was the best moment to intervene. Gaul and Ursus sent messengers to Corsica, suing for peace, while their armies joined the conflict in Litania and launched an assault on Gaul's border strongholds. Between the winter of 1030 and summer of 1031, the three-nation coalition applied relentless pressure on multiple fronts, forcing the Gaulish legion to abandon its offensive on key Litanian cities and switch to a defensive posture. The war had now spread beyond Litania and engulfed the entire core. As the war was slipping away from Gaul, Corsica refused to retreat. Confident in his martial skill, he led Gaul's forces in an even fiercer attack and maneuvers against the coalition forces. The emperor hoped to annihilate the enemy's main force and drive Ursus and Victoria out of the war. This method of warfare was revolutionary in an era when high-speed warships were not all that fast. It allowed the Grande Armée to leverage its advantages in training, equipment, and command structure. However, this strategy over an extended period was bound to increase the empire's casualties. Corsica was dealing a high-stakes gamble, believing he still had a chance to win. I'll throw in some World War technology and tactics as well. Gaul had several chances to cut her losses and sue for peace, but the belligerents remained entrenched in their positions, and every attempt at a ceasefire failed. Just a week after negotiations collapsed, in October 1031, the historic Battle of the Four Emperors erupted in the central valleys of Lower Gaul. Ooh, battle maps. The Battle of the Four Emperors was the decisive engagement of the War of the Four Nations. The battle was named because it was fought in the presence of four monarchs: the Emperor of Gaul, the Witch King of Litania, the Lion King of Victoria, and the Tsar of Ursus. The Gaulish forces, led by Emperor Corsica I, fought the combined armies of Litania, Victoria, and Ursus. Gaul, vastly outnumbered, was quickly defeated. Corsica's first flagship was destroyed. The View vanguard fought to the last man, and the emperor's body was never found. At the outset of the battle, the Gaulish forces exploited the disorganized command structures of the coalition and launched an effective preemptive strike. However, their reinforcements were intercepted and decimated by the Victorian fleet. Gaul's main forces ultimately collapsed against the coalition's superior manpower and firepower. The interception was masterminded by the Iron Duke, who would later be known across Victoria as the Emperor's Death, or the Empire's death knell. Shortly after this decisive victory, the coalition forces razed Gaul's capital, Lingonet, after its defenders refused to surrender. The war concluded with the total destruction of the Gaulish Empire, wiping her from the map. And this is a map of the battle. October 17 through October 21st in 1031. Corsica was indeed a military genius, but perhaps he was overcome by his unquenchable ambition. Marshal Moulin's defensive line failed to stop Tsar Ivan from joining the main battle, while Marshal de la Berry's troops were intercepted by the Duke of Wellington and were deviated from the original direction. The trap Corsica designed became his own tomb. Before him stood the Witch King's mobile arts spires and the main Victorian fleet, personally commanded by Frederick III. Behind him, a brewing catastrophe was about to unfold. That one marshal's name was just of LeBerry. Once again, that's like if someone's name was of human. What do we have here? We have Corsica, front and center. We have Duke de l'Avion, who went... Do we have a cardinal on here? No. But he went to fight an Ursus guy. What does that say? It says Ilya Dutarov, who retreated. And so Duke d'Avion continued onwards until they met with Mikhail Ivanov just past the Jean-Francois Moulin's defensive line, which, as we read down here, failed to stop Tsar Ivan from joining the center battle. The LeBerry was coming in from, we'll say, the south. Intercepted by Duke Wellington, though they kept moving forward alongside Wellington's forces until they were forced to retreat near Frederick I's army. And then the Witch King and Frederick met with Corsica's army. Purple area is the catastrophe zone that occurred on the 21st. I assume this dotted line is the defensive front originally that was pushed back over time. Not quite sure. There you go. I don't know who this guy is over here, but they went somewhere. I don't know where they went. Neat. The aftermath. Lingonet, once hailed as the capital of the world, was shelled to smithereens by the coalition forces. Millions of refugees perished either in the harsh wilderness or in refuge camps, plagued by unsanitary conditions. The Gaulish restorationists wove their fervent desire to restore Gaul into a new political ideology which refined what it means to be Gaulish. This new nationalism was every bit as significant as the fall of the empire itself. It would have a lasting influence on all future political movements. After the war, Victoria's nations reached an agreement to divide Gaul's nomadic cities and territories. Victoria, which had annexed the prosperous valleys of Lower Gaul, emerged as the great beneficiary of the empire's collapse. Gaul's resources and technologies laid the groundwork for Victoria's eventual rise to continental dominance in the new era. However, the rivalry between Victoria's dukes remained unresolved, and the distribution of post-war spoils only intensified the political complexities and power struggles among them. It can be said that the event of 1019 led to those of 1031, and that 1031 in turn paved the way for 1072. when the emperor was killed, ultimately shaping Victoria's path towards the summer of 1098. I assume 1019 is Colombia's independence, because that would have been 10 years before 29, which is the battle. And 98 is, of course, the Kasdal War. As the main battlefield of the War of the Four Nations, Litania suffered devastation and was left in a state of deep despair. Dakota I, and under the leadership of the Großherzog Leopold, secretly studied Gaulish technology, searching for clues in ancient Orangenian arts to counter the Witch King. On the other hand, the Witch King's madness worsened after the war. He became increasingly obsessed with the arts and more brutal in his rule. Some even say he foresaw his own downfall during this time. Ursus greatly benefited from the war, gaining knowledge of Gaulish Orangenium technology, which provided the foundation for further reforming her industrial production. Emulating Gaul, Ursus began constructing a powerful fleet. More significantly, the frail and introverted Tsarevich Vladimir gained a newfound confidence after personally fighting in the war. Over the next 40 years, he would grow the Ursus Empire to where his hands pointed, fulfilling his vision. The widespread use of military Orangenium products during this massive far-reaching conflict resulted in a surge of oropathy cases among refugees and wounded veterans. After the war, the escalating infected crisis triggered severe social upheavals, forcing governments to implement measures to manage and control the growing number of infected. For the first time, resistance movements led by former military personnel and infected emerged in the public eye. Looking back nearly 70 years later, it becomes clear that the War of the Four Nations marked a major turning point which transformed the infected issue into a modern crisis. That's interesting. Very interesting. And now, Laterano. Interesting choice. The order in which they put some of these chapters is strange. You'd think we'd continue like all the core nations. But no, we're going to go to Laterano next. I mean, I guess we did... Litania already, right? Yeah, we did do Litania already. So we did Ursus, Litania. I guess that is everyone then. Maybe Kazimierz could have been next, but I guess that is everyone actually. Yeah, because we did, yeah. Not as weird, I suppose. But Kazimierz is right there. So, Laterano. Epigraph. The first time I heard a Lateran sermon was a few decades ago, in a humble monastery nestled between Victoria and Laterano. It was a dark autumn night, and there were no lamps lit within the room. The cleric's halo was the only light by which to see. To this day, I have not forgotten a passage of scripture he read to us. Life is matter shaped by order, yet among the living, devils are the closest to death. Their presence blights fertile verdure and poisons the land with stones of murder. Thus we are damned among all races to bear the blackstone pox with most ease. At their advent, the heavens themselves brewed black, heralding the first catastrophe upon us. Since the dark hour, none have bled or beheld the light of the sun. Only through the sacred guidance of the law are the sancta crowned in radiance. Interesting choice, Erikson, to start off the Laterano section with a very racist epigraph. But I guess, you know, that's fitting in some ways. Let's not pretend Laterano is not an ethno-state. The cleric described it as an ancient piece of scripture, mostly unknown to the people of today. Upon settling down in Lateran, I attempted to locate the provenance of this passage, but was unable to find any in government records, ancient religious tomes, or in popular art of the time. There was no trace of it. It was as though it had disappeared from the history of Laterano. This conundrum left me sleepless, and so I pulled myself out of my bed to gaze at the street lights outside my window. A most wondrous sight. It was then that a sudden realization dawned. Aren't the streetlights that line the streets lit by the very stones of murder? Yeah. Overview. When the people of other nations think of Laterano, they are likely to go through the following three phases. At first, the Holy City's reputation makes one picture an inflexible, solemn nation, one that adheres to strict dogma and admonishments in all aspects of life. A nation of believers whose every movement made or word spoken is cautious. However, if you ever have the pleasure of knowing a few Sancta, you will quickly realize their deeds are imbued with a certain boldness and imaginativeness, such as installing propellers atop their heads, or making statues that can be fed little cakes, or blowing up public buildings in the middle of the street. Characteristics that do not conform to the stereotypical view of Laterano. Rather, it is a nation that enjoys a high degree of freedom when it comes to chasing the pleasures of life. While at last, once you set foot in Laterano in person, you will finally see this freedom and pleasure is a mere byproduct of order. This near spontaneous yet methodical order might be considered a phenomenon most worth investigating in the Holy City. Said three phases, but I think that's only one phase. Anyway. Official language, Lateran. Dominant group, Sancta Liberi. Official currency, Signa Creditorium. Laterano has no need for physical currency, but for the sake of convenience or rather amusement, the rather unusual Signa Creditorium is in general use across the city. Signa Creditorium can be exchanged for pure gold at a certain rate in Laterano. They have no need for physical currency? Why? Since when? History. The old bell tower, known as the Tower of Revelations, has seen several millennia worth of history. It is possible that its bricks were personally laid by the first saints themselves, and yet Laterans pass by this incredible relic every day with barely a hint of wonder, as though they were walking past some newly constructed homes. The thickness of history is compressed down within the city. The ancient deeds of the first saints are a commonplace part of the modern Lateran's faith in life. In this nation where the people of history walk side by side, there has never been a need for archaeology. The prosperity of Laterano has continued for thousands of years. Its antiquities have been consigned to the earth, so there is naturally no need to dig them up. They are either neatly displayed in the exhibition halls of their cathedrals or still used by the people in their daily lives. However, in the year 1042, a statue of what was assumed to be an ancient Lateran saint was unearthed in the wasteland to the west of Laterano, causing a stir in the entire archaeological community. Oh, snap. An excavation. Cillian Dougal was born into a Victorian household that followed the Lateran faith. His father was a cleric in a small chapel in the Taran region. Cillian spent his youth in a time of war. The War of the Four Nations demanded oranginium and the other minerals in huge quantities. And amidst the wave of labor dedicated to national defense, Cillian became an excellent geological prospector. He took part in developing, testing, and using deep vein exploration equipment for prospecting purposes. After the war, large-scale oranginium extraction had left many workers and technical staff suffering from oropathy and destitution. Cillian did his best to assist his former colleagues in returning to work, but his efforts only resulted in many court summons, interrogations, and demotions. Most of his former friends simply roamed around until their untimely deaths. Only a handful of survivors managed to escape or managed to scrape a living in a remote village chapel where they tilled the barren soil for the rest of their lives. In 1042, the geological survey team that Cillian was part of performed survey following the Targalis Prime. Performed a survey following the Targalis Prime vein eastwards in an attempt to find suitable mining sites. While in a shallow exploratory tunnel, Cillian noticed some tube-shaped perforated metal remnants. Oh wow, Calson's got a lot to say. Alright. On which parts? I don't know. The remnants were encased in an oranginium crystal. To the devout Cillian, the form of the metal seemed to carry a rather similar grace to a Lateran gun. Though his colleagues paid no attention to it and even scoffed at him. However, as they swung their pickaxes, it quickly became clear that they had found a large ashen-colored rock. This time, Cillian could clearly see they had unearthed a stone carved into the shape of a gun. The news relayed back on domestic channels rapidly generated interest within academia. The creator of the Royal Museum of Londinium at the time swiftly organized an experienced archaeological team, among them some of the forefront academics who had once unearthed King Charles's moving castle blueprints in Old Gaul. The first time the archaeological team arrived in the dig site, Cillian's survey team were retained and named to provide guidance and safety, but they were not allowed within 5 meters of the exploratory tunnel, the reason given being to prevent them from inadvertently damaging important imperial treasures. After several days of excavation, there was more than just a stone gun found. A completely intact statue of a saint had been unearthed. According to oranginium corrosion analysis, this statue might be older than most Terran relics, and the uniqueness of its features supports that theory. The stonework is elaborate and finely detailed, but it does not portray the saint's face. Unlike traditional saint statues with their ambial visages, the statue forgoes the head, instead displaying a geometric shape rather like a puzzle cube atop the neck. As such, a rather outrageous theory grew popular at the time. It was theorized that the first saints did not truly exist. Instead, they were at abstract symbols of the law which became personified by later generations of Lotterans. Interesting. The statue had a cube head. I guess that makes sense because the first Sancta would have known about the laws, so they probably just made the cube head for that reason. Then the true nature was kept secret, so... I don't know where this Calcit stuff comes into play. What is she saying here? I think this is tied to this paragraph, so we'll read it. The first saints did historically exist, but the modern conception of them has been molded by later generations of Lotterans. This ancient statue, her handwriting is kind of hard to read sometimes. This ancient statue has no face because the first saints never had human features to begin with. Throughout their lives, they retained the appearance of the T-Cas, with sharp fangs, claws, horns, and long tails. Apart from the halos on their heads and the glorious wings on their backs, they appeared no different from the ancient T-Cas. It's not hard to imagine why later generations of Sancta would change or would choose to erase their faces and invent a new appearance for them, one that matched their ideals of virtue. The first saints made immense contributions while erasing their faces may not have been a direct commandment of the law. It was consistent with the law's underlying principles and purpose. Leaving aside the disastrous and hatred or divisions and hatred between the two peoples, while the elders and ancients were hunting down the Sarkaz, the Sancta also needed means to preserve themselves. Erasing all connection to the Sarkaz was one of such manner. So that's an interesting little thing there. The final part. So not only did the law perhaps not, it might have been a commandment, but also just the climate of the time was like the ancient elders fighting the Sarkaz. The Sancta are like, well, we don't want to be fought, so let's just erase our connection to them and pretend like we're just normal guys like everyone else. A betrayal. This archaeological excavation enjoyed the direct support of the Victorian government. At the time, the consecutive falls of splendor of Gaul and Iberia meant Victoria was awash with expansionist fervor. For the first 100 years, Laterano enjoyed a pivotal position in the core, placing it at the heart of both commerce and diplomacy, a position that prideful Victoria intended to usurp. A letter received by the archaeological team proceeds thusly: a statue of a saint beyond Laterano's kin, one that might be its most ancient cultural legacy, would surely shake the foundations of the Holy City's prestige. This precarious work of art will be a gift from Victorian archaeology to the Empire, and it shall encase the glory of Victoria in everlasting radiance. The archaeological team were beside themselves with glee, and they hurried the statue back to Londinium after 2 days, where merit and condemnation awaited them. Not condemnation, but commendation. We could have foreseen that a team carrying nothing but stone would be robbed halfway. Or who could have foreseen that a team carrying nothing but stone would be robbed halfway through their journey? People arrived to find nothing but the remnants of their transport wrecked by Oranginium explosives, and the entire team reduced to nothing but fragments of Oranginium. The statue of the saint was nowhere to be found. The camp was bustling with activity the night the team received the letter, and none had noticed that Killian had disappeared alongside an off-road vehicle. After the incident, the police suspected him of leaking the schedule and itinerary of the team's trip, believing his devotion to a foreign faith had become his patriotism. Follow-up investigations yielded no clues, however, as his trail was lost on the Great Plains. In the end, the police could only accuse Killian of treason and claim that he had hired Sarkaz mercenaries to attack the archaeologists and plunder the statue. What's it say here? In fact, the history of Laterano also began with an excavation and a betrayal. The Victorians were eager to extract things from the land that could bring wealth and power, Oranginium, artifacts, and such. In ancient times, the desperate T-Cas had also sought power from within the earth that could change their fate. Unfortunately, at that time, the T-Cas were not yet able to harness such. Many T-Cas perished at the excavation site, and even today, the most radical human experiments in Colombia likely pale in comparison to the horrors of that time. Continued. The Great Excavation was both an act of self-preservation and self-destruction. The first Sancta fled the excavation in droves. At first, the Sancta defection did not cause any profound impact, but as the T-Cas scattered across the land while the Sancta settled peacefully and prospered, the seeds of hatred took root and began to grow. In present-day Kasdal, acts of betrayal are common, and yesterday's comrades may be today's enemies. But in the eyes of the Sarkaz, refusing to share in their profound suffering is the true betrayal that engenders hatred. An unresolved case. 2 months later, Killian unexpectedly appeared on the Victorian border, covered in wounds and on the verge of collapse. He was found muttering nonsense to himself, such as the statue does not exist, faith does not exist, the holy city does not exist, among other things. The doctors who arrived on the scene simply shook his head, and Killian spent the last moments of his life undergoing interrogation by 2 police officers. Ouch. Upon seeing the officers, it was as though he had become another man, slowly sitting up straight and muttering on the topics of war, Oranginium, and Victoria. As the officers wrote their reports afterwards, they realized that Killian had not spoken any new thoughts during his interrogation. They were all statements he had used years before to shield the infected he knew from interrogations, repeated once more. Over the next several decades, no eyes fell on the lost relic. The former curator of the Royal Museum of Londinium died before finding the treasure he so yearned for, and it never appeared in the showroom of the Lateran Basilica either. Nowadays, all knowledge we have of this statue is based on a few rough sketches from the ill-fated archaeological team. To the deaths of the team members and the disappearance of the statue became an unresolved case, leading to no small amount of conspiracy theories accompanying an explosion of interest in the long-standing question of the falling sanctas. But the government of Laterano has never acknowledged the existence of the statue. As for the doubts and suspicions of the people, this ancient adage is the only silent response. Life is matter shaped by order, yet among the living devils are closest to death. At their advent, the heavens themselves brood black, heralding the first catastrophe upon us. Lights sear their flesh, order pierces their skin. The law watches over Laterano, and in turn the Sancta are people of order. Thus, of all the races, 'tis devils who most hate the Sancta of Laterano. If the people of order abandon that order, their crimes are unforgivable. They fall from the grace of the law, adorned with devil's horns and tails. These mark them as enemies of order, a brand they shall bear to their deaths. Two racist passages. Are all the Lateran adages racist? It was not before those few surviving sketches became meaningless scribbles. The case of the missing saint became a mere urban legend, and the various conjectures that stemmed from it became idle gossip. The city of Laterano prospered as it always did, her foundations unshaken. And Kautzit says, the Sancta were born the very moment when law came into being. They gained a new sense of identity well before... That's such a strange W, Kautzit. It's disconnected for one. Well before any physiological differences became apparent. When they recovered from the intense dizziness, the first Sancta felt like newborn children. Amidst the low humming sound, they touched and embraced one another, sharing a new understanding. From that point on, the TCAS seemed like a foreign other, and their solemn mission of war, as nothing appeared more than a fleeting... What is that word? That's I would say dream, but that's not dream. That's ill. I don't know. In the eyes of the TCAS, the Sancta betrayed their entire race, but the first Sancta were simply unwilling to be enslaved by the Outbloods. Today, both sides' grievances have been forgotten, and almost no one remembers the origins of the conflict. The Sarkaz continue to nurture their hatred with the blood of the Sancta, while the Sancta betrayal of the Sarkaz only deepens prejudice among the people. Well then. I wonder if Killian... So Killian came back and was like talking like, the statue doesn't exist, faith doesn't exist. I wonder if... somehow he received some sort of revelation about the true nature of the law. From the statue or something. Well, geography. Laterano occupies a central location on known Terra. Its northern and western regions have a high elevation, while the southern and east are low. This disparity in height is rather pronounced. The area, dominated by a tropical monsoon climate, enjoying high temperatures year-round and 2 distinct seasons, one dry and one rainy. Huh. The perfect conditions for sugar crops. Perhaps it's thanks to these blissful geographic conditions that Laterano, or Laterans, are so fond of dessert. Laterano's in a tropical monsoon climate. I never imagined that. That just completely shifts my entire perspective of this country. But them growing sugar crops does make sense, and therefore they would need a climate like that as well to grow sugar. Wow. If one were to look from the city towards the northwest, one would see a yellow-green plateau. Beneath the short grasses swaying in the wind lies a bounty of oranginium and metals. The vast majority of the metals used to make Lateran firearms come from mines here. To the southwest of Laterano is a field of gold and green. The mountain rivers flood at regular intervals, creating a vast alluvial plain. Beside the grace of the law and the fertile soil is another major source of Laterano's long-lived prosperity. Economy. Its long-standing neutrality and pivotal geographic location makes Laterano a major free trade hub of the core. This flourishing trade network has not been monopolized by any larger trading firms, but rather a vast array of haloed caravans weaving their way around the city. Thanks to her bountiful geographic conditions, Laterano has a strong foundation in agriculture. Besides wheat, a large amount of high-value cash crops are grown in the southeast alluvial plains, chief among them sugar crops. The sugar from these fields end up not only on the Lateran dinner table in the myriad shapes and sizes, but an unending stream is sold to the nations surrounding Laterano. Monasteries scattered among the fields independently process their harvests into agricultural goods. Cheese, bread, beer, and many other goods have become significant sources of income for these institutions in the modern age. Thanks to their storied tradition of firearm creation, most gunsmiths of Laterano are proficient in the design and manufacture of precision oranginium components. Specialized processing and electronics manufacturing are Laterano's most prominent industries, which are granted the nation extremely high intercity net penetration. I also didn't know they were into electronics so much. But they do love electronic music. And we've got a little thing about the Laden Monastery, everyone's favorite. The sister milk bread have for breakfast, or there's an either. The system milk bread I have for breakfast each morning is crafted by one such monastery, renowned for its time-honored reputation. That counts the things for over here, so we're not going to read that yet. Beliefs. The faith of Laterano addresses the law as their lord, and they afford it the highest of reverence. Even the noisiest of Laterans will pray to the law in silence. Despite all the rules, commandments, and creeds of Laterano being collectively categorized under the vague banner of the law is, in its strictest sense, only comprises less than 100 regulatory words in its totality. It is hard to imagine how several rules could create such highest believers. As a faithful Liberi explains, our Lord is law, as are the 100 regulatory words you spoke of. In truth, there are very few Laterans who would try to define the law, and even fewer who would try to delineate its range. The words used to display the law are rather simple indeed, but several millennia ago, the first saints used them to establish the foundations of Laterano. It could be said that the law is the most ancient and primary of Laterano's rules, and its influence can be felt on every aspect of her society. Broadly speaking, the order of the Lateran society is the law itself, and it is within the social order that we see the appeal of the faith. Comparatively, the Sancta will give 1,001 different answers. Some say that the law was molded or has molded the instinctive actions of the Sancta, while some say that the way that the Sancta think was preordained by the law. Some say that the precepts of the law are woven into the background of the Lateran language, while others say that its influence flows between the people of Laterano. However, a large majority of Sancta will mention the same phenomenon when they discuss the law and faith. Empathy. Empathy with a capital E. My wife Susanna and I began our relationship more than 7 years ago, but I am still not particularly skilled in determining her mood. And I frequently find myself the unintentional target of her ire. But two Sancta need only meet face to face to feel as though they have been the best of friends for decades. I'm not claiming that they would love each other well, or know each other well. Empathy is not mind reading after all, and each person's thoughts and memories are still their own. I'm also not claiming that their moods will synchronize. One needs only look at the 4 haloed children next door to understand. While 2 of them cry, the other 2 will laugh. However, when 2 Sancta empathize with one another, they are keenly aware of the other's state of emotion. And with this as their foundation, the 2 can quickly understand one another, bringing about a mutual understanding. The order of Lateran society is to some extent built upon this understanding and rapport. Representatives of order take many forms across Terra. Yerig's traditional customs, or Columbia's federal articles, the Janissaries of the Sargonian Lords Emir, or the Ursus Guard. The commonality is that they all involve some kind of external force, but the order of Laterano shows an unbelievable spontaneity and comparison. Even in areas that the law does not cover, Laterans consciously maintain harmony. There is even a common Lateran proverb: 2 halos can solve any dispute. Whether a leak in the air conditioning, a scratch on a car, or an inadvertent detonation of personal property, it seems both parties need only meet and chat with one another to diffuse the conflict. In truth, it is also rather common for both parties to hit it off in conversation, leaving the damaged item forgotten by the wayside. However, I will say that I always have some misgivings about Sancta empathy. While admittedly the Laterans live in peace and harmony, it is hard for me to imagine all of them happy at all times. Not even the Holy City can boast a complex or a complete lack of negative emotions, such as dismay, sorrow, or anger within its walls. If a Sancta perceives such an emotion keenly, would this negative emotion not have an equally negative influence on the receiver? To which counts, it says. Many people who have a basic understanding of empathy often develop this unnecessary worry. In fact, since the Sancta are able to keenly sense emotions, they naturally know how to manage them. Turning empathy into sympathy and fostering mutual understanding through shared emotions are intrinsic tendencies of the Sancta. I also have this down here, which is a letter from an author to a Lateran publishing house. Within the letter, the author talks about the difficulty of choosing the title for their new cookbook and asks the editor to help decide on one. The votes from the editorial department are as follows. Liber de Lucindine e Guaudio, 2 votes. Ars Magna de Texendo Hydrati Carboni, 1 vote. Pax e Amor in Prestinici par Patisseries, 3 votes. I don't know what this I don't know what this is for. Maybe those titles translate into something. Non linitur excepsis procetis dentarea, 4 votes. Coccus si Lateran s, 1 vote. Dere legali suprema etra artifici socialate, 4 votes. Lexicon en cudicuntur torrendum de ex coptis allosum et ex centum baleris ease. 0 votes. Okay. And then this continues on empathy, it looks like. So empathy is not as mysterious or elusive as many people imagine. The mangler beasts know how to gauge the emotions of their companion. A young mangler beast determines when it can get food from its pack mother's mouth by reading her expressions. As social animals, humans share neither instincts when interacting with others. We also try to feel their emotions. Similar instincts. Unfortunately, it takes quite a bit of effort to do that well and precisely. However, the Sancta can effortlessly achieve perfect, natural understanding as the law grants them heightened emotional perception. To this end, or to use a decidedly imperfect metaphor, the law of Laterano is like spectacles and hearing aids in a sick ward. It does not grant anyone any special abilities, it merely helps people accomplish simple tasks, things everyone needs to do but may struggle to do well. Judging by the present state of Laterano, the law was initially, that's an I. I feel like her handwriting is getting worse over time. Initially criticized for its ruthless suppression of freedom. Yet today, Laterano is considered one of the freest nations in all of Terra. The law that crushes individuality has, ironically, become a divine blessing that sustains the paradise of Laterano. Perhaps this is the best outcome it can hope for from it. That's crazy to consider it one of the freest nations on Terra. Free for literally one group of people, and another kind of group of people kind of have freedom. But I guess, to be fair, sarcasm and infected are kind of discriminated everywhere, so no one would consider them part of that statistic anyway. Politics and military. The law. Letters of the law do not directly define Laterano's political or power structures, but it is without a doubt the source of its public authority. Functionaries of the Lateran government, the Pope included, exercise power in the name of the law. And successive generations of popes have added annotations and additions to the Lateran statute. The process of the Pope interpreting the law is equivalent to the process of enacting legislation, and these interpretations give rise to clauses in the statute known as commandments or rules. The sole person with the authority to interpret the law is the Pope, though the cardinals of the tribunal provide an all-important support to the process of enforcement. Government. The Pope is the supreme leader of Laterano. The full title of the reigning Pope, Evangelist the 11th, is the guardian, keeper, and executor of the most supreme law, Evangelist the 7th, or 11th. Depending on the situation, it may be simplified further or elaborated upon. The first half of the title refers to the Pope's role of guarding the law, interpreting the law, and implementing the law, as well as governing Laterano in its name. The second half is a name that the Pope has inherited from one of the first saints. Evangelist is, in this case, alongside the virtues that saint represents. Sacrifice and unity. That's fitting. Wow. Yeah, okay. When a pope passes away or steps down from office, any sancta within the sacred college of cardinals who wishes to succeed him may become candidates, and all members of the college will come together to vote on which candidate will be elected the next pope. This process is known as the conclave, and it is one of Laterano's most important divine ceremonies. Almost every single one of the conclave ceremonies broke the prior record for creating most explosions in Laterano in a single day. The central government of Laterano is the Lateran Curia, also commonly referred to as the Church. The Curia consists of 7 tribunals, and the chief official of each tribunal is a cardinal personally appointed by the Pope. The first tribunal upholds the law. It is the judiciary of Laterano, and it has the power to perform judicial review on the administrative actions of all government departments. The other 6 tribunals are all law enforcement agencies dedicated to government affairs. Regarding different aspects of society, the second tribunal is responsible for coordination between various departments, while the third tribunal is focused on agriculture, industry, and transportation, among other things. The fourth tribunal oversees trade and the postal service. The fifth tribunal is in charge of public safety and notarial work. The Lateran Notarial Hall is under the jurisdiction of the fifth, and the hall itself oversees public security, defense, notarization, fire control, and many diverse affairs. If needed, the Notarial Hall's field executors can appear in any corner of Terra to ensure the rights of Lateran citizens abroad and to urge them to fulfill their duties as citizens. The sixth tribunal oversees the civil administration, education, and healthcare. Household regulation, or registration, and social welfare are all also under the purview of the sixth. Each city district of Pagus, and Hamlet contains a 6th tribunal office, and it is these representatives' offices that Lateran citizens first turn to during difficult times. In addition, the Ecclesia Requiem, which oversees funerals and all such related affairs, is part of the 6th Tribunal. The 7th Tribunal is the Department of Intelligence, Diplomacy, and National Security. Laterano has long maintained a neutral stance in diplomacy, serving as a witness or a mediator in many international disputes. Before Evangelist XI was elected Pope, he was a messenger himself for the 7th Tribunal who witnessed the destruction of the Gaulish Empire. Following the establishment of the Legati in 1069, Laterano's role as international witness and mediator has become more normalized and institutionalized than ever before. Up here we have the parlor of the Lateran Basilica, where I was once fortunate enough to meet the Pope himself for a chat. Not only is the reigning Pope rather skilled in the sphere of politics, but he reveals an astonishing ingenuity in his choice of dishes. And of course, guns, a symbol of Lateran faith. In the Lateran faith, the gun is often considered the grace and the care of the law, or the protection that the law affords Laterano. According to ancient records, it was under the guidance of the law that the Sancta discovered the gun and associated technologies. The innate talent of the Sancta for operating them is also considered a gift from the law. The gun is a symbol of the Lateran faith. Design elements incorporating the gun and bullet motifs can be found in prayer robes, on statues of saints, the covers of ancient tomes, and the stained glass windows of chapels. If you ever find yourself lost, hold tight your gun and regain your faith. As a pope once preached to his flock, when the faithful are frightened or at a loss, they will unconsciously clench the grip of their firearms, which brings a sense of relief. An etched bullet pendant, handmade customization, 100% good quality, can still be fired. Please select a caliber that matches your guardian gun. It has been proven that such a pendant can effectively alleviate negative emotions such as fear and restlessness, not as effective as an entire magazine. Wow, Laterano's got actually a lot, I guess. We'll see how far we get for this. Military. Hold on. All right. While she has not been touched by the fires of war for nearly 1,000 years, Laterano maintains a well-trained military, though they do not always exude an aura of majesty or terror. If one were to bump into a pontifical guard sipping coffee at a street corner or stumble across a dozing gun knight on a monastery bench, a Lateran citizen would not feel the slightest bit of astonishment. The gun knights, also known as the Apostolistic Knights, as the name implies, They are independently appointed by the Lateran Curia, report directly to the Pope. The gun knights are typically the most skilled sharpshooters in all of Laterano, and they are provided with heavy firearms nearly as long as the average man's height. As anyone who has attempted to operate a gun would understand, skillfully operating heavy weapons such as these can be considered a great feat in its own right. The Pontifica Cohor, or guards in casual speech, are Laterano's standing armed public security force in charge of the internal defense of Laterano. They consist of many squads, each commanded by a gun knight. The members of the Pontifica Cohor rarely leave the sectors they guard, but when responding to sudden incidents, the gun knight may select elite members of the guards to form a special task force that can act as a flexible operational unit. In times of major hostility, the commanders of all Pontifica Cohor squads will form a gun knight war council who are jointly responsible for wartime command. At the same time, the Pope will begin to recruit troops from all across Laterano. Once passing a physical examination and review, every citizen who has obtained their guardian gun at the age of 12 can become a part of a substantial garrison force. Here we have, of course, a picture of a gun knight and a pontifical guard. A gun knight and a guard of the Pontifica Cohor, guards stationed in the hamlets around Laterano, often garrison the local monastery where they drill. The locals pray while they train, because the sound of shots echoing about the place helps to keep the mind concentrated so as to make the devotee one with the law. Culture and society. Laterano is home to approximately 6 million people. There you go. With the vast majority of them within the Lateran city. The rest reside in hamlets scattered across the countryside. Laterano's population mainly consists of Sancta, but a considerable portion of residents are non-Sancta, the most common of which are the Liberi. More than 1,000 years ago, the Sancta of the city welcomed the first Liberi refugees. As they crossed the breadths of the land to escape catastrophe, the tall walls and white towers on the horizon seemed a godsend. As far as these tribes of hunter-gatherers were concerned, the concept of a city was vague and only existed in the most ancient of legends. Perhaps these Liberi nomads did not understand the order of society of the Sancta, but some of them still harbored a simple yearning for the richness and stability of city life. These refugees established settlements in the fertile soils around Lateran city. From the goods they procured and their diet from the goods they produced and their diet to their language and laws, they began to imitate the Sancta way of life. Where am I? I lost my place. All right. The Sancta constructed churches within these settlements to meet the needs of local faithful wishing for a place to pray. They also offered education, healthcare, and other services or goods such as beer and pastries. They even organized the training of guards to defend against enemy attack. This was the birth of many of Laterano's monasteries. Nowadays, the hamlets outside the city are considered an inalienable part of Laterano. Despite the Sancta leaving their mark on the nation, even down to the haloed street lamps, other races will find no such systematic discrimination within the country. NB Sarkaz are wholly forbidden from entering the country at all. No one else will be discriminated against, except the Sarkaz. NB means nota bene, or bene, nota bene. Okay. There is almost no host within Laterano, perhaps except for the Pope, who is barred to non-sancta, and no small amount of them can be seen in every profession. Well, that's not true, though, because the gun stuff with the... or what... Well, no, there are Liberi pontifical guards. I guess they just have a harder time getting it, but they can get it. Never seen a Liberi gun knight, though. Residing in Laterano for several years, I am just like any local Liberi, having grown accustomed to how Sancta communicate with others. No matter if it is my landlady, the administrative staff of the 6th Tribunal, the bookstore proprietor, or Pope Evangelist 11th himself, they care more about whether the dessert for lunch will be stuffed with apple or pineapple than whether their interlocutor sports of a halo over his head or feathers over his ears. Over here is a street lamp. A street lamp made in the image of the Sancta's halo. It is especially tall and large, similar to the spotlights used in the arenas of Caji Major. Many complain that the lighting is far too bright. The brightness of the Sancta's halo varies from person to person. Oh. Some are unusually bright, while others unusually dark. The former envy the latter for being able to get a good night's sleep, while the latter envy the former for their radiant splendor during the day. It is a pity that a halo's brightness cannot be altered at will, and so the Sancta have no choice but to use the street lamps to make up for their regrets. This is why this large street lamps turn on during the day and turn off at night. What? They turn off at night? Also, interesting that different halos have different brightness. Did not know that. They're trying to train Fiammetta to be a non-Sancta gun knight. See, I was trying to remember Fiammetta's story because I'm pretty sure she talked about... Her story has talked about a lot about being a non-Sancta in Laterano. And I thought she talked about some sort of discrimination around the guns or something. I was like, I wasn't sure. I know she talked about empathy a lot and not being able to understand Sancta as well as they can understand each other. And that leaves the non-Sancta in Laterano slightly discriminated. Or not discriminated, but alienated. But I felt like she talked about gun stuff as well. Because technically she uses a grenade launcher, which I don't believe actually is a gun. But maybe it is. Because part of the thing is that besides black steel, really, guns are hard to use. The Sancta have an innate ability to use them in their Oranginium arts, and Black Steel has invented a way for non-Sancta to use them more effectively. But that's part of why it's always been highly limited to Laterano. Yeah, I can't quite remember. What were we? So, over their years. But there is one thing that no resident of Laterano can deny. While they enjoy near equal rights and opportunity, the other races are unable to take part in the empathy of the Sancta. As the Sancta laugh and weep together, the other races find it difficult to keep up in the sharing of joy and sorrow. Most of the time, this estrangement is not born of malice, and so the Lateran Liberi may not blame the unfamiliarity, alienation, and helplessness they feel on ruthless gossip mongers, uncaring and spiteful civil servants, or knife-wielding patrolmen like the people of Ursus do. When faced with the friendly smiles of the Sancta, often the only place the Liberi can turn to is self-doubt. I have a long excerpt here. What's outside the silver screen? As I opened the car door, I was greeted by a loud rumble. This was the signal that the Laterans were lifting their spirits. My old colleague Silas was waiting by the road, his halo bright as ever. As we walked alongside the soft cemetery soil, we chatted about the explosion just prior. With his impressive technical expertise, he determined that it was the 8th generation of caramel mint flavor flash powder bomb, but I, on the other hand, thought it was a newly released Halo M explosive bundle. Although they do employ gravediggers at times, the Ecclesia Requitem will comply with the deceased and their relatives' wishes and use explosives to dig their graves. I didn't realize that the old Liberi in that coffin loved explosions as much. The group of mourners buzzed with chatter. People believed that the dead had become one with the law, and so they raised their wine glasses, buckets of ice cream, and cupcakes to express their wishes. When it came time to sing hymns, one old tone death sancta, apparently the sweetheart of the deceased, mumbled them with barely any melody to speak of, like a drunken metal crab. During the gun salute, Silas hit a nearby old tree and the branch fell square on the head of the cleric overseeing the ceremony. Though he made no sound, the grimace on his face made his pain clear. I felt a little tickle in my chest, and a string of sharp, high-pitched sounds leapt out of my throat. An abrupt silence. Only once I heard my laughter echo through the pale morning did I realize that the Sancta were all keeping their eyes down, their faces dignified and their voices silent, barely even breathing. Only my cut-off laughter resounded in the silence, out of place in all its indignity. I knew that Lateran funeral rites are as such. At an unpredictable moment, between the joy and laughter, the friends and relatives of the deceased will bid their final farewells, and their hearts and the connection that empathy grants them means that every Sancta will be drowned in this complex emotion. Perhaps the mourning Sancta did not hear my laughter, but I still couldn't help but feel uneasy at my faux pas. I found myself entangled within thoughts about my shameful display. What if singing off-key or getting hit on the head by a tree branch just weren't funny at all? After all, at a Lateran funeral, where solemnity is hardly emphasized, undignified showing did not mean that all senses had been lost, nor do they necessarily induce smiles of amusement. While I was turned inwards, the Sancta had already returned to their cheery selves. I did not know what had come over him, but Silas was rocking back and forth with laughter as he leaned against the spade, to the point where he nearly flung his own halo off his head. I tried to return to the high spirits that I had when I had just stepped out of the car and laugh alongside them once more, but I found myself suddenly failing to understand why they were laughing. Silas joyously said something to me, but I couldn't hear him clearly, trapped in my train of thought. Through the haze of thoughts, I saw that the Sancta had formed a circle and started some sort of round dance. They stood hand in hand, forming a snug, closed loop. They jumped as they spun on their feet, leaving the ground, and they soared through the sky. Under the bright sunlight, the ring of Sancta let off a shining radiance of their own, as the Lateran city herself was haloed. I chased the halo, thinking of what questions I wanted to ask and how I would interpret the answers, but I had barely run 2 steps before I slipped and fell right into the deceased's grave. That is when everyone laughed. An excerpt from Liberi author Aratus' short story, Liberi in Sepulchro. Gosh, that one really... It feels like it would just be so anxiety-inducing to live there as a non-Sancta. I see what they meant by the self-doubt. Are you here like, is this funny? Am I being stupid? Like, does everyone hate me? Did I miss out on the conversation? A few more pages before a subsection on Laterano. That's probably where we'll stop. Cultural milieu. The most characteristic art form of Laterano displays itself not as the theater or in the chapel, but through the entire city. To the outsider's eyes, the indulgent and fantastical farces that are staged daily on the streets of the city are a type of performance art. But if one were to ask a Lateran, this is merely the way they have done things since childhood, and it is where one finds the joy of life. Freedom and merriment, dessert and explosions all come together to form Laterano's cultural milieu. Up here we have a Ecclesia Requiem. The vast majority of Lateran funerals are held in buildings such as this. Laterans believe that the dead have become one with the law, and as the law is one with Laterano, they rarely visit graves to pay their respects. When a funeral is not being held, the Ecclesia Requiem is among the most peaceful places in all of Laterano. Many foul beasts that cannot handle the chaos of the city build their nests here. It is said that in the past, There were fowl-watching enthusiasts who studied day and night just to qualify for a position within the Ecclesia Requitum. Every day they could see flocks of fowl beasts circling the skies above the church. We also have a breakdown of an average Lateran citizen's expenses in 1097. 18% for food, 11% of which is sweets, 7% for clothing, 16% of expenses is for housing, 8% for living services, 9% for transportation and communication, 15% for culture and entertainment, which includes a 9% for ammunition, medical care, 8%, repair for urban damage, 19%. Gun management. Guns are systematically managed in Laterano. Information on every gun's manufacture and sale, alongside what gun every citizen owns and their qualifications for use, are filed in the records of the Notarial Hall. If one were to ask a Laterano or Lateran about to reach their 12th birthday, a trip to the firearm workshop might be the best birthday gift ever. On that day, they will be escorted to a registered and regulated workshop by an executor of the Notarial Hall, where they may choose any gun or firearm that they so fancy. A child who has obtained their guardian gun begins each day by joyfully opening its case and admiring their new partner. But they will have to undergo a firearms hands-on training regimen over the next 4 years, graduate secondary school, and obtain a Lateran firearms operation license before they are officially qualified to operate it. After all this, young Laterans are still required to periodically report to the Notarial Hall for basic firearms inspections in order to keep up their qualifications. If they violate firearm usage regulation too often, they may have the misfortune of the Notarial Hall revoking their license. They can have their licenses revoked. That's crazy. People like to joke about Laterano's guns and everything, but apparently it's very well regulated, which is good. Education. Laterano boasts a universal education system divided into primary, secondary, and tertiary levels. Tertiary education can be further split into two branches. One focuses on vocational and technical schools, while the other is based on a more standard university-based education. Yeah, that's pretty normal for a lot of places. All Lateran citizens of sufficient age can enroll at any school within the city and receive free education for 14 years. If the resident of a hamlet does not wish to travel to the city for their education, they may choose to study at a local monastery instead. And over here we have a gun workshop in Laterano may have a statue of a saint holding a gun at the entrance. Any child who has just received their first gun will excitedly recreate the statue's pose. This drawing comes from a student at Stavonis Secondary School in Laterano City. The vast majority of schools and monasteries in Laterano offer a wide range of firearm-related courses, including ones such as firearms and explosives, use, mechanics, manufacturing, aesthetics and designs, cultural history, sociology, and so on and so forth. There are even courses focusing on niches for students with a keen interest Commune cum Scoloptis is a fun course, very popular among secondary schoolers. Saints, Legacy, and Scholars is a preparatory course for students who wish to specialize in antique gun study. Greater Than Guns is a course tailored for non-Sancta students to teach them how to handle a range of common long-range weapons, such as automatic crossbows and grenade launchers. Grenade launchers, as I said. The sports field of Lateran secondary schools rarely have courses for ball games, but shooting ranges and demolition trenches are nearly universal. Yeah, so they... Guns are still more of a Sancta thing than a Lateran thing. I don't know what this one thing, I was gonna look it up because I'm sure it's a funny joke. It just says it translates to common with guns. So I'm not really sure what that's supposed to mean. Apparently it's a fun course though. Healthcare. The quality of Laterano's healthcare system is enough to make a man doubt that he is still on Terra. Each pagus of the city has a district hospital, while every hamlet in its surrounding has a clinic. With the support of universal healthcare, a citizen need not fear bankruptcy in the face of illness. Laterano boasts the highest penetration of oropathy detection equipment among the nations. Each hospital has access to equipment that can detect blood oranginium density crystal to an accuracy of 2 decimal places, while offices all across the country have portable detection bracelets. Ah, okay. So Laterano's got the monitors, the bracelet monitors, just as part of their normal healthcare system. A citizen diagnosed with oropathy will face permanent deportation from Laterano. But this one stipulation aside, the infected suffer no discrimination or persecution. Erikson's bias is coming in again. he lived in Laterano for a while. You can't say they faced no discrimination or persecution after saying, but, you know, they do get exiled and aren't allowed to live in the country anymore. Erikson, that is discrimination. But they continue to be considered citizens, and their rights as citizens are still guaranteed. Infected citizens who are forced to leave may still receive subsidies and medication at regular intervals. Okay, well, that's fair enough. In return, the field executors who carry this welfare also urge these citizens to fulfill their duties. It is worth mentioning that, just like how other healthcare systems across Terra have departments specialized in race-specific ailments, such as the Department of Sarah Surgery, Lateran hospitals also provide special services for Sancta-specific maladies. Routine health inspections for Sancta children include tests for halo stability and empathy capacity. Effective treatments for these traits are now widely available in Laterano after many years of development. So they do get exiled. The government still might give them some medicine, though, which is nice, I guess. Doesn't make up for it, in my opinion, but What is this? A bird cage? What is that? Oh, it's the Common in Guns course. Comes with a set of Nidus Scoleptorum paraphernalia, said to be able to placate a moody gun. So do you take your guns out for walks? We ride them through the skies, if you can believe it. I don't know what this course is about. Why is there a bird cage? What is this course about? And another very big excerpt. Moody guns. Is the course about pretending your gun is like a pet or something? I don't know. Try turning off the light. In 1073, Pagus Stavona Central Hospital in Lateran City admitted a young Sancta girl. Over the next 20 years, her diagnosis and treatment were presided over by a doctor of quite some repute. This doctor has shared her medical history with me. Did she give permission for that? Is that a rule in Laterana? Is the doctor allowed to do that? At first, during routine examinations, her empathy data was rather unstable over the course of many tests, but the average matched the basic standard. It was recommended to retest her at the earliest possible opportunity. At 6, during routine examinations, her empathy data was stable over the course of many tests, but the average was significantly different from standard values. Long-term observation is required alongside treatment to any related issues. An official from the Curia has already checked over her parents' identities. There are no political concerns, so she can be hospitalized under normal procedures. A small bout of good luck amidst the bad. At 8 and 5 months, progress during empathy treatment and rehabilitation has been slow. The patient found it difficult to concentrate and repeated cotton candy during therapy. Traumatic stereotype behavior suspected. Requires consultation with relatives to understand her circumstances. At 8 and 9 months, progress during empathy treatment and rehabilitation has been slowed. The patient's cotton candy verbal tic was thanks to the presiding doctor's white curly hair, not stereotypic behavior. Considering changing the treatment methods, perhaps adopting a reward-based system. What flavor of cotton candy do children of this age prefer? Creamy pepper? Would it be too strong for her? Pepper? Pepper cotton candy? At 11 and 3 months, periodic progress has been made during empathy treatment and rehabilitation. The patient initially displayed the ability to sense emotions but cannot express them very well. When she cannot find a suitable way to express them, the patient displays a notable agitation. Language delay is suspected. Post-treatment language education is needed. At 15, there has been an outstanding progress during empathy treatment and rehabilitation. The patient is able to accurately perceive the color of emotions and can detect variations in mood promptly. We may discharge her very soon. I hope that she will be able to live a happy life from now on, given that it's Laterano City, or Lateran City. That's almost a certainty. She would occasionally reach out to me after her discharge. At times, she would introduce other potential patients or simply chat about her life via mail. So far, she has been in good health, has found work, and has even settled down. Her husband is called Silas, or some such, and by all accounts, he is a good man, willing to do anything and everything for her. What a coincidence. This is also about a guy named Silas. Like, presumably the same Silas. Wow. Have there been any unexpected developments? Best see for yourself. At 28, during an emergency examination, her empathy data was incredibly unstable over the course of many tests, and the average was significantly different from standard values. The patient refused to be admitted or for immediate observation due to personal concerns. We will recommend hospitalization as soon as possible. She persevered in her request for confidentiality. Remember to use the code name rather than the name of the disease in all subsequent examination reports. At 28 and 4 months, progress during empathy treatment and rehabilitation has been slow. According to her family, the suicide of her close friend, the Liberi author Aratus, had caused her to sink into abnormal and severe mood swings. The patient refused to discuss anything to do with Aratus, and we are unable to use this as a starting point for therapy. Dude. The author Aratus. Dang, there's a whole like little backstory here going on with these excerpts. So Aratus was writing a story about what it was like being a Liberi in Laterano. Her husband has also been acting very abnormally, constantly asking if there are things that we have been hiding from him. Perhaps we should suspend family visitation. At 28 and 4 months, progress during empathy treatment and rehabilitation has been slow. All medical staff by the patient's side felt a sharp pain as though suffering laceration. The patient has shown a certain degree of self-harming behavior and must be moved to a padded room. When meeting the family, the patient displays a mix of fear, grievance, remorse, anger, and despair, a very complex set of emotions. Family visitation must be suspended. And that's it, I guess. So what was the... I guess that was just to show off... the, like, different empathy... medical issues and things that can crop up. Conclusion. The hand that tears the silver screen. A night in Londinium in the year 1034, crowds filed into movie theaters after having their fill of wining and dining, all to appreciate the trendiest new art form of the time, color motion pictures. As the people of the time saw it, the screens projected onto the silver screen, or the scenes, were indistinguishable from reality, and there was no need for them to trek about the vast empire to experience all its wonders. At the climax of the movie, a sharp noise echoed through the cinema, and the screen began to tear apart from the middle as a trembling, wizened hand stretched through the ripped screen. The movie theater broke out into screams and uproars. This was a social experiment plotted with utmost care, intended to treat an illness that was born alongside the rise of color film. Screen syndrome, a form of film addiction that left its sufferers unable to distinguish between cinema and reality. The outcome of this experiment was not ideal. The sufferers of the syndrome displayed some disenchantment with the medium of film for a few days after the experiment, but they quickly returned to wasting away day after day at the cinema. Laterano, the holy city, has continually reshaped my perception. Over the decades that I have spent wandering Terra, never have I seen a nation as prosperous, stable, free, and forgiving as Laterano. Oh, Erikson. That is perhaps why I have chosen here as the place where I will complete this tome. As those who are born and raised in Laterano would say, the city is as the world once was, and while they may have read books that describe suffering in words, they do not truly understand what those words mean. One need only look at it from another angle for this near-perfect landscape to deform, distort, and expose the disappointment reality behind the screen. For thousands of years, there have been countless humans who would tear through the divine screen of Laterano, hoping to reveal what oppression and violence must lie behind the glory. Laterana City prospered as she always did, her foundations unshaken. After all, the fact that this great land plays host to such a holy city is a miracle in its own right. Oof, this is some serious Lateran propaganda. He even tried to call me out. It's like, some people have tried to reveal the oppression behind it. Yeah, that's true, actually. I have. That's where we'll stop. The next part is influence of the church outside of Laterano, which actually is going to be, I think, going to be very interesting. And then that leads into Iberia, which makes sense. Can't get this bookmark to fold up. You found a funny promotion record? From who? I never meant for you to see this, Doctor. Her blood robes are soaked with her blood robes. Her robes are soaked with blood. Her apologetic smile does little to mitigate the terror that her appearance inspires. I warned you, but you came to find me anyway, she sighs. How unfortunate. You're such a good person. She touches your cheeks with her hands, which are cold and sticky with blood. Darkness begins to fill her normally kind and compassionate eyes. You remember that her friend, Aurelia, looked at you with the same cold gaze. Keep this a secret, won't you, Doctor, please? Her fingers wrap around your skull like a predatory foul beast's claws. You cannot help but tremble. Please don't look at me like that, Doctor. She lets go and takes a couple steps back. She sees no fears in your eyes, only pity. It terrifies her. What is this from? Gray Spirit? That, you know, that was my first thought. Strange. I guess Ulcacons, or I don't know, something's going on with that. Was that an op record? Because it's detailed for just it's not just a voice line, because it's got our perspective. Oh yeah, her file. Yeah, I see. Okay. Strange. Don't know anything about her really. She showed up briefly. Well, anyway, that's all for now. Try and do this again next week. Tomorrow is Fubula Friday. And other than that, thank you all for watching. And until we meet again, may the sands of time treat you well.